I'm going to show you why Jesus looked at his mother in front of 200 guests at a wedding and said to her, "Woman, what have I to do with thee?" If you spoke to your mother that way in front of your entire family, your house would never invite you again. And yet, it was said by the Son of God, the most loving man who ever walked this earth, to the woman who carried him for 9 months, hid him from Herod in Egypt, taught him the scriptures, and followed him all the way to the cross. In the next few minutes, you're going to discover 3 things that completely change that phrase. First, what the Greek word gynai really meant in the 1st century, a word that, according to the historian Cassius Dio, the Emperor Augustus himself used to address Queen Cleopatra. Second, the 6 passages of the Old Testament where exactly the same expression appears, and why that changes everything. And third, what happened next at that wedding in Cana, an explosive theological connection that links Mary, the cross, and the final chapter of the book of Revelation. Stay until the end, because at the close, we're going to bring together 3 scenes, separated by more than 30 years, into a single straight line. And you're going to understand why Mary was never a rejected mother, but the first woman in all of history who truly understood who her son was. If serious biblical study interests you, hit like right now, subscribe to the channel, hit hype on the video, and let's go. Close your eyes for a moment. It's Galilee, around the year 30 of our era. A dusty village called Cana, on a hill above the Beit Netophah Valley. The sun falls obliquely over the olive groves. The air smells of dampened wool, freshly baked bread, and smoke from fig wood. 200 people, dressed in tunics of raw linen, are seated around low wooden tables. Children run between their mothers' legs. A lamb roasts over the coals. And in the center, beneath a canopy of white cloths, the bride and groom. To understand what is about to happen, you have to understand what this night means to them. This is not the ceremony you know today. In the 1st century, a Jewish wedding in Galilee was the climax of a process that had begun months earlier, sometimes years earlier. First, the groom's parents had paid the mohar, the bridal price, to the bride's family. Then, in a ceremony called erusin, the couple had been legally betrothed, so legally that any breaking off required a formal certificate of divorce. And now, this night, finally, came the nisuin, the public consummation of the covenant. The bride, dressed in a white tunic and covered with a veil, had been led in procession from her father's house to the groom's house, accompanied by torches, dances, tambourines, and songs from the Song of Songs. That is why every detail of this celebration was sacred. Every cup poured carried the weight of a covenant being fulfilled. Every bite was a public yes to the alliance. Every note of music was a blessing over the marriage. And for that very reason, any failure was a public wound to the covenant. In the 1st century, a Jewish wedding did not last a few hours. It lasted 7 days, 7 full days of food, wine, dance, music, and blessings. It is attested in the book of Judges, chapter 14, in the marriage of Samson with the Philistine woman, where it expressly states that the feast lasted 7 days. It is also attested in Genesis chapter 29 when Laban tells Jacob, "Fulfill her week." And it is attested in the book of Tobit chapter 11 where the bride's father orders 7 days of celebration in honor of the newlyweds. 7 days. And the entire cost, all of it, fell upon the groom and his family. The food, the wine, the musicians, the lodging of guests who came from neighboring villages and slept in the houses of the village neighbors. It was the most expensive moment of a man's life, and also the most exposed, because in that culture, hospitality was not a polite option. It was a sacred duty. He who failed to honor his guests dragged shame across generations. And then, somewhere on the 3rd or 4th day of the feast, the unthinkable happens. The wine runs out, And here you need to understand the real weight of this, because in Hebrew culture, wine was not just a drink, it was a symbol. It was the most powerful symbol of messianic joy. When the prophets spoke of the day in which God would restore his people, they always spoke of wine that would flow down the mountains. Amos chapter 9 verse 13 had written, "And the mountains shall drop sweet wine, and all the hills shall melt." Joel chapter 3 verse 18 had promised, "And it shall come to pass in that day that the mountains shall drop down new wine." And at every Jewish Passover, at every family Sabbath meal, lifting the cup of wine was proclaiming between the lines the hope that God would one day complete the promise. That is why, when wine ran out at a wedding before its time, it was not just a social embarrassment. It was, in symbolic language, the failure of joy. It was the image of a covenant that promised abundance and delivered scarcity. It was the exact shadow of the deepest problem of the people of Israel. The old covenant, good and holy, could no longer sustain full joy. Something was missing from it. Someone was missing from it. But the guests at Cana did not understand this yet. For them, it was simply a disaster. Stop and understand what this meant. It was not a logistical detail. It was a social catastrophe. In that small village, where everyone knew each other by name, that family would be remembered forever as the family that did not know how to receive. The bride would weep hidden in her chamber. The groom's father would lower his head. The rumors would run along the roads to Sepphoris and Nazareth. And family disputes, public shame, and even the possible reclaiming of part of the dowry by the bride's family were very real consequences. In the courtyard, the servants look at each other in alarm. One runs and whispers to the master of the banquet. The master of the banquet turns pale. And among the guests, a woman of middle age notices it before anyone else. Her dark eyes scan the tables. She counts the jars. She counts the faces, and she understands. That woman is Mary, the mother of Jesus. Nazareth lies about 12 to 14 kilometers to the southeast, depending on which Cana we tread, and given the proximity, it is likely that she knows the bride and groom. Perhaps they are relatives. Perhaps it is the wedding of a cousin of the Lord. The text does not say. But one thing is clear. Mary feels responsible. Mary feels part of this. Pause for a second on this character. Mary, at this moment in history, is not the stylized image that the centuries have painted. She is a Jewish woman of about 45 or 50 years old. Her hands bear the marks of 3 decades of grinding wheat, kneading bread, spinning wool, caring for the sick in her village. She has calluses on her fingers. Her face is weathered by the Galilean sun, and in her eyes she carries a secret that no one at that feast suspects. The secret she carried in silence for 30 years, the secret an angel announced to her one afternoon in Nazareth, the secret she saw fulfilled on the cold night in Bethlehem, the secret that fled with her to Egypt, escaping from Herod, the secret she lost in the temple when her son was 12 years old, and who came back home with her saying, "Wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business?" Mary knows who Jesus is. She has known from the beginning. But she also knows that her son has not yet manifested himself. She knows he has lived 30 years of silence, working as a carpenter in Nazareth, hidden from the eyes of the world. And suddenly, at this wedding, in this crisis of the wine, Mary intuits something. She intuits that the hour might be now, and here comes the first twist that almost no one explains to you. Mary does not approach her son to ask him for an abstract miracle. She approaches as a mother. She approaches with a very brief sentence, in a whisper, almost as if speaking to herself, only 3 words in Greek. Wine they have not. She asks him for nothing. She only informs him, as if she knew in the depths of her heart that this would be enough. Mary, with a low voice, almost a whisper, without looking at anyone else, said, "They have no wine." And Jesus, lifting his gaze toward her, without raising his voice, without anger, but with a solemnity that weighs like a stone, answered, "Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come." Read it again, slowly. "Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come." If you read this in English in the 21st century, it sounds harsh. It sounds cutting. It sounds like a son putting distance between himself and his mother in front of the whole feast. And for centuries, uncomfortable readers have tried to soften the phrase, to explain it away, to hide it, as if Jesus had had a bad day. But that reading is false. It is false because it ignores three things that we're going to dismantle right now. The real weight of the Greek word gynai, the historical sense of the expression, "What have I to do with thee?" and the theological meaning of the word hour in the fourth gospel. Let's begin with the first. In the Greek of the first century, gynai was not woman the way our current word is. It was not contemptuous, it was not cold, it was evocative of respect. Here is the proof. In the Odyssey, Odysseus, after 20 years of absence, returns to Ithaca and meets Penelope, his wife. How does he address her? The woman who has waited for him a whole life weaving and unweaving the shroud. He does not say, "My wife." He does not say, "Beloved." He calls her gynai. From the king's mouth toward the queen, the word is honor, not distance. In Attic tragedy, kings address their queens with gynai. Sophocles uses it that way. Euripides uses it that way. And there is an even more striking case. The Roman historian Cassius Dio relates that the Emperor Augustus, the most powerful man in the world at that moment, when addressing Queen Cleopatra of Egypt in the most solemn moment of their meeting, called her gynai. It was not an insult. It was, in that world, an elevated form of address. But there is more. Jesus himself, in the fourth gospel, uses gynai again at three other crucial moments. In John chapter 4, speaking with the Samaritan woman by Jacob's well, he says to her, "Woman, believe me." In John chapter 20, after the resurrection, addressing Mary Magdalene weeping beside the empty tomb, he asks her, "Woman, why weepest thou?" And in John chapter 19, from the cross, looking at his own mother with eyes already weary from blood and thirst, he says to her once again, "Woman, behold thy son." Do you see it? 4 scenes, 4 women, 1 word. And in all of them, far from being a contempt, it is a solemn recognition. In the Greek culture of the first century, gynai is the word a king uses with his queen, an emperor with an empress, and a son with his mother, when what he is about to say carries the weight of eternity. Think about what that means. When a Jewish mother heard her son call her gynai in front of people, she knew something great was about to happen. She knew her son was not angry. She knew her son was about to pronounce a word that would mark history. And that is exactly what is happening at Cana. Mary is not being scolded. Mary is witnessing the first public act of the Messiah, and her son is giving her, with that ancient and honored word, the place of privilege that only a prophetic mother deserves. So when Jesus, at Cana, looks at Mary and says gynai to her, he is not rejecting her, he is lifting her up. He is placing her in a position that she still does not fully understand, because that day, at that wedding, Mary is not just mom. Mary is being called, for the first time publicly, to a much greater role. Now comes the second layer, and it is the one that most surprises those who have never opened the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament that was the Bible the apostles read. The phrase of Jesus, word by word, is, "What to me and to thee." It is an idiom, and it appears exactly the same in 6 passages of the Old Testament. Let's go through them one by one, because they are the key that opens the full meaning of Cana. First, in the book of Judges, chapter 11, verse 12. Jephthah, the judge of Israel, is surrounded by the Ammonites who attack him. Before the battle, he sends messengers to the Ammonite king and says with a firm voice, "What hast thou to do with me, that thou art come against me to fight in my land?" It is a phrase of separation of cause, of delimitation of mission. Second, in the first book of Kings, chapter 17, verse 18, Elijah the prophet lodges in the house of the widow of Zarephath. Her son falls ill and dies, and the woman, torn by pain, grabs the prophet by his tunic and cries out with tears, "What have I to do with thee, O thou man of God? Art thou come unto me to call my sin to remembrance? What have you to do with me in this moment of mourning?" Again, separation of planes. Third, in the second book of Kings, chapter 3, verse 13, the prophet Elisha encounters 3 kings who come seeking an oracle from God before marching against Moab. And Elisha, looking at the apostate king of Israel, says to him with contempt, "What have I to do with thee? Get thee to the prophets of thy father." Different plane, different mission. Fourth, in the second book of Chronicles, chapter 35, verse 21, Pharaoh Necho of Egypt marches toward the Euphrates to fight against Babylon. King Josiah of Judah, with zeal and without understanding the plan of God, interposes himself, and Necho sends messengers to him and says, almost pleading, "What have I to do with thee, thou king of Judah? I come not against thee, I come against another house." Again, 2 missions that do not cross. Fifth and sixth, in the second book of Samuel, chapters 16 and 19, King David twice rejects the counsel of the sons of Zeruiah, his warrior nephews, who want to kill a man for revenge. And David, serene, says to them both times, "What have I to do with you, ye sons of Zeruiah? My mission today is not yours. My time is not yours. Do you see it?" In each of the 6 cases, the formula means the same thing. It is not an insult. It is not a rudeness. It is a solemn, almost liturgical way of saying, "You and I are on different planes at this moment. My mission and yours do not coincide right now." It is the language of the boundary, the language of the calling, the language of the not yet. And Jesus at Cana is using exactly that formula with his mother. He is not rejecting her. He is telling her with words that any hearer formed in the Hebrew scriptures would recognize at once. "Mary, at this moment, my mission and yours do not coincide. I am no longer under your calendar. I am under another." And here the third piece falls into place. Mine hour is not yet come. In the fourth gospel, the word hour is not just any unit of time. It is a technical term, a theological term, and it appears marked like a bell sounding throughout the gospel at key moments. In John chapter 7, verse 30, the evangelist comments about those who wanted to arrest Jesus, but no man laid hands on him because his hour was not yet come. In John chapter 8, verse 20, again the enemies want to seize him, and again the evangelist writes, "For his hour was not yet come." In John chapter 12, verse 23, everything changes. Some Greeks have come looking for him, and for the first time Jesus says, with a grave voice, "The hour is come that the Son of Man should be glorified." In John chapter 13, verse 1, before the Last Supper, the evangelist notes, "Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father." And in John chapter 17, verse 1, the Lord lifts up his eyes to heaven and prays, "Father, the hour is come. Glorify thy Son, that thy Son also may glorify thee." Do you see it? The hour in the fourth gospel is not a clock. It is the whole of the passion, the cross, the death, the resurrection, and the glorification of Jesus. It is the absolute climax of his mission, and Cana is in chapter 2, right at the beginning. When Jesus says to his mother, "Mine hour is not yet come," he is saying in technical language that only attentive readers of the fourth gospel can follow. "Mother, What you are asking me now is going to set everything in motion. It is going to begin the countdown. This sign is going to open a road from which I can no longer turn back. And at the end of that road is the cross. That is what is behind 4 words. Not a rejection, an announcement, the first time in the Gospel of John that Jesus speaks of his hour. And Mary somehow understands. And here comes one of the most impressive and most quiet moments of the entire Gospel. Mary hears the word gynai. She hears the formula of the Old Testament. She hears, "Mine hour is not yet come." And she does not take offense. She does not withdraw. She does not argue. She does one thing only. She turns to the servants. She looks them in the eyes. And she says 5 words to them that are the last record we have of her voice in the entire New Testament. Mary, without raising her voice, with the calm of one who has learned to keep things in her heart for 30 years, ordered, "Whatsoever he saith unto you, do it." Stop here, because this is enormous. Mary has just heard a sentence that, in any other Jewish mother, would have produced a reaction of protest. "How do you speak to me like that? Am I not your mother? Did I not bear you? Did I not raise you?" And yet, what Mary does is the opposite. She lets it go. She delivers it up. She recognizes in silence that this is no longer just her son. He is the Messiah. And the only valid instruction for the servants and for herself and for us is, do whatever he says. This, dear brothers and sisters, is the model of mature faith. A faith that does not manipulate God to obtain results. A faith that places the need before God, without imposing on him the how or the when, and that afterward steps aside and obeys. And if you've made it this far, hit like on the video, because what comes next is the heart of everything. What happened next at Cana was not just a miracle. It was a messianic declaration that connects with the cross, with the supper, and with the final chapter of Revelation. Look toward the courtyard of the house. Beside the wall, lined up, there are 6 jars of limestone, hand-carved. They are not clay jars. They are of stone. And that matters. Because according to the halakha of the 1st century, attested in the Mishnah, in the tractate Kalim, vessels of stone were not susceptible to ritual impurity. Pottery, if contaminated, had to be broken. Stone, no. Stone remained pure. That is why, in any well-to-do Jewish home of the 1st century, there were stone jars for the water of purification. The excavations of the archaeologist Tom McCullough at Cana, a hill about 12 kilometers to the northwest of Nazareth, have revealed precisely this kind of jars, carved in local limestone with a capacity of between 70 and 120 liters each. The Gospel account says exactly that. Stone jars for the rites of purification with a capacity of between 2 and 3 meter, which coincides with the archaeological measurements. This is not a decorative detail. It is a detail that fits with the material culture of 1st century Galilee. And here comes the symbolism. Because 6 jars in the classical rabbinic reading of the number evoke incompleteness. 7 is the number of fullness, of rest, of the Sabbath. 6 is the number of man, created on the 6th day, still awaiting the 7th. The religious system to which those jars belong, the system of external ritual purification, is good, but it is incomplete. It lacks the 7th element. It lacks fullness. And notice something else. Those jars were empty when Jesus arrived. The text does not say they were empty by negligence. They were empty because it was the last phase of the feast, when no one needed to purify themselves anymore to enter. They were empty because the ritual had already fulfilled its function. They were jars that no longer served any purpose. And precisely those jars, the useless ones, the forgotten ones, the ones no one looked at anymore, are the ones Jesus chooses to perform his first miracle. It is as if the 4th Gospel were telling us, in a whisper, The old system is not discarded, it is filled, it is transformed, it is turned into something new. What seemed exhausted holds in its interior the raw material of the miracle. All it takes is for the word of the Son to touch it. And Jesus, with a calm but firm voice, ordered the servants, "Fill the water pots with water." And the servants filled them to the brim. To the brim. The evangelist insists on the detail. To the brim. Imagine the scene. The servants with their eyes wide open, without understanding anything, carrying jars from the village well, going up and down through the courtyard of the house, sweat on their foreheads, bare feet on the stones, and the jars, one by one, filling up until the water nearly overflows. 700, 800, up to 720 liters of water, all that quantity, without anyone yet knowing what is going to happen. Stop and notice something. Jesus does not touch the water. He does not bless the jars. He does not pronounce a formula. He does not lift his arms toward heaven. He does not shout. He does not act like the pagan magicians of the first century who needed theatrical gestures and secret words to impress their audience. Jesus simply gives an order, and creation obeys. This is what the fourth gospel wants you to see. This is what it calls manifesting his glory. The Son of the Father, by whom all things were made according to John chapter 1, does not need theater to transform matter. He only needs to speak. And the Word, once again, as in the beginning, orders the chaos and brings life. Afterward, without pronouncing magical formulas, without raising his hands, without a single theatrical gesture, Jesus said, "Draw out now, and bear unto the governor of the feast." And the servants, obedient to the word, drew out, and what they brought to the governor of the feast was no longer water. It was wine, and not just any wine. It was the best wine of the feast. The governor of the feast, who knew nothing of what had happened in the courtyard, tasted the cup. He raised his eyebrows. He called the bridegroom, and, astonished, almost laughing, he exclaimed, "Every man at the beginning doth set forth good wine, and when men have well drunk, then that which is worse, but thou hast kept the good wine until now." And here another layer is buried, because the governor of the feast in the first century was no ordinary character. He was the director of the celebration. He was responsible for tasting every cup before it was served, for regulating the rhythm of the banquet, for protecting the honor of the bridegroom. He was, moreover, an expert in wines. He knew how to distinguish the vintage by the aroma. He knew how to read the color in the lamplight. He knew when a wine had been cut with water and when it was pure. And this governor of the feast tasted the cup of Cana, and with all his years of experience, declared that this wine was superior to the one served at the beginning of the feast. Do you catch the irony? The governor of the feast, without knowing it, is pronouncing a prophecy. He is saying that the true bridegroom of that feast is Jesus, because only the bridegroom was responsible for the wine, and here the human bridegroom has done nothing. The wine has been provided by another, and that other, that true bridegroom, is Jesus of Nazareth. This connects with two enormous texts of the Old Testament. First, with Isaiah chapter 25, verse 6, where the prophet announces, "And in this mountain shall the Lord of hosts make unto all people a feast of fat things, a feast of wines on the lees." Wines on the lees, wine of the Messianic age, the banquet at the end of times. That is exactly what is happening at Cana, and second, with the fourth gospel itself, because 2 chapters later, in John chapter 3, verse 29, John the Baptist, speaking of Jesus, will say, "He that hath the bride is the bridegroom. I am only the friend of the bridegroom." Who is the bridegroom? Jesus. Who is the bride? The people of God. And where is that motif of the heavenly bridegroom first manifested? At Cana. Now follow the line with me. 3 years after Cana, on a Thursday night, in the upper room in Jerusalem, Jesus lifts a cup of wine over a table. His hands tremble slightly. His deep eyes scan the 12, and he says, with a voice that trembles within, "This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins." Look at that moment carefully. It is the Jewish Passover. The room is lit by oil lamps that flicker against walls of limestone. The low table, in a U-shape, is covered with unleavened bread, bitter herbs, roasted lamb, and cups of red wine. It is the most sacred meal of the Hebrew calendar, the meal that remembers the Exodus, the blood of the Lamb painted on the doorposts, the angel who passed over the houses of Israel. And in the midst of that ancient rite, Jesus does something that no rabbi had done before. He takes one of the 4 traditional cups of Passover, probably the third, the cup of redemption, and he transforms it into something else. He turns it into the cup of the new covenant. He turns it into his blood. What was Cana about? Wine. What is the Last Supper about? Wine. And what does the wine signify? The blood of the Lamb, shed to inaugurate the new alliance. And hours later, that same Jesus, with his hands nailed to a Roman beam, looks down. The blood drips down his eyebrows. His lungs fight for air. And among the feet of the cross, he sees one woman among all women. It is her. It is Mary. The same Mary of Cana, now with whiter hair, red eyes, hands crossed over her chest. And Jesus, with the last breath he has left, before the "it is finished," pronounces exactly the same word as in Cana. He looks at her and says, "Woman, behold thy son." And to the beloved disciple he says, "Behold thy mother." Do you see it? The circle closes. The word gynai at Cana at the beginning, the word gynai at the cross at the end, the same word, the same woman, and between the two, 33 years of silent obedience. And the prophecy of Simeon, pronounced when Jesus was only 40 days old, is now fulfilled with the weight of lead. Do you remember? Luke chapter 2, verse 35. The aged Simeon, holding the child in his arms, looks at Mary and says with a trembling voice, "And a sword shall pierce through thy own soul also." That sword is now. That blade is now. That hour is the hour. And Mary, faithful until the last heartbeat, does not flee. She does not deny. She does not scream. She remains. She is the only one of the women whom the evangelist names at the foot of the cross. She is the faithful mother of the surrendered son. But the story does not end there. 3 days later, the tomb is empty. 50 days later, in the upper room of Jerusalem, 120 people pray together, and among them the book of Acts, chapter 1, verse 14, records a name that could not be missing. Mary, the mother of Jesus, continued with one accord in prayer with the women and with his brethren. Imagine that room. It is the same upper room where Jesus had celebrated the Last Supper. The same walls, the same view toward the rooftops of Jerusalem. And there, among the apostles whom the world remembers with great names, is seated an older woman dressed in a dark tunic with her hands crossed on her lap. Mary, the woman of Cana, the woman of the cross, the woman who learned before anyone else what it means to say, "Do whatever he says." And suddenly, as the book of Acts narrates in chapter 2, a sound like a rushing mighty wind fills the house. Tongues of fire rest upon each one, and all of them, including Mary, are filled with the Holy Spirit. That woman, who 30 years before had received the Spirit at the Annunciation in Nazareth, now receives him again, alongside the newborn church. She is the only person in all of Scripture of whom it is recorded that the Spirit came upon her at 2 distinct moments, once to conceive the Son, once to accompany the church that this Son had begotten in his death. Mary did not receive, according to the records of the Gospels, an exclusive appearance of the risen one. That first appearance had the face of Mary Magdalene beside an opened tomb. But Mary, the mother, saw something equally glorious. She saw the church being born. She saw the tongues of fire descending upon the apostles. She saw Peter, the same Peter who denied 3 times, preach with boldness to 3,000 people. And she saw that the child she had carried in her arms in a manger now reigned forever from the throne of the Father. And according to the tradition of the fathers of the early church, recorded by writers such as Irenaeus and others, Mary lived her last years under the care of the Apostle John, that beloved disciple to whom the Lord had entrusted her from the cross. And from that hour the disciple took her unto his own home, as says John 19:27. That was the last obedience of Mary, to receive as a son one she had not borne, because the motherhood of Mary from the cross onward was no longer only according to the flesh, it was, mystically, according to faith. Now open your heart, because what we are about to say here touches you. You, brother, you, sister who is listening. You also have had your Cana. You have had your night in which you came to God with a concrete need, a wedding in your life in which the wine ran out. Perhaps it was an illness that would not go away. Perhaps it was a job that did not come. Perhaps it was a child who walked away. Perhaps it was a marriage that was breaking. Perhaps it was a dream that was dying before your eyes. I know that night. I know that chair where you sat with the Bible open and your eyes dry from so much crying. I know that question repeated to exhaustion. Why, Lord? How long? I know those hospital corridors, those calls that no one answered, those prayers that lost their voice as you spoke them. I know what it is like to watch the wine jar empty before your eyes and to be unable to do anything. And you asked God, and you said to him like Mary, Lord, I do not have. And God, instead of answering you with an instant miracle, answered you with a silence, or worse, with a sentence similar to the one at Cana. Son, daughter, mine hour is not yet come. And you, in that moment, felt that God was setting you aside. You felt that God was busy with more important matters. You felt that you were alone in the courtyard of the feast, counting the empty jars. Perhaps right now, while you listen to these words, there is a name that comes to your mind, a name of someone for whom you have been praying for years without seeing an answer, a father who is not healed, a son who does not come back home, a husband who is still far away, a debt that keeps growing. Perhaps it is your own name, your own body, your own story, and you have reached the point where you almost no longer want to keep asking, because every unanswered prayer hurts more than the previous one. But listen to me. What happened at Cana also happens in your life. When God says to you, it is not yet the hour, He is not rejecting you. He is aligning you. He is adjusting your calendar to His. He is waiting for you, like the servants, to fill the jars to the brim of obedience, to the brim of faith, to the brim of patience. And here is the key that many overlook. The servants of Cana did not transform the water into wine. They only carried water. What they put in was the only thing they could put in: work, obedience, common water. What Jesus put in was the only thing only He could put in: the transformation. And that is why, when you fill your jar with what you have, even though it seems little to you, even though it seems like only worthless water, God knows how to turn the little into much. He knows how to turn the common into a miracle. He knows how to turn the water of your silent obedience into the wine of His visible glory. And notice one more detail in the text. The servants did not know what was happening until afterward. The governor of the feast did not taste the water, he tasted the wine. But the servants did know where that came from. They had carried the jars. They had seen the empty jars filled with common water. And they saw afterward how that same water came out as wine. Only those who carry the water know what miracle they are participating in. Only those who obey without understanding see afterward the hand of God moving over matter. If you are not willing to carry the water, you will never see the wine. If you are not willing to obey in the small things, you will never know the miracle of the great ones. because when his hour comes, his yes is going to be so great, so abundant, so superior, that the governor of the feast of your life will taste the cup and will say, astonished, "Thou hast kept the good wine until now." And that wine, brother, is always better than the one you would have chosen on your third day. Always. Now join the three scenes with me: Cana, the cross, Revelation. At Cana, in the year 30, there is a human wedding. Wine is missing. Jesus, the true hidden bridegroom, provides it, and he manifests, the evangelist says, his glory. At the cross, in the year 33, there is a cosmic wedding. The bridegroom delivers his blood. The cup that at Cana was sweet wine is now the bitter cup of the Passion. And in place of the water of ritual purification, water and blood flow from the side of the crucified bridegroom. The system of the 6 jars is fulfilled. The 7th day arrives. Fullness arrives. And in Revelation chapter 19, verses 6 through 9, the Apostle John, now elderly on the island of Patmos, hears a multitude like the noise of many waters, and an immense chorus that cries, "Alleluia, for the Lord God omnipotent reigneth. Let us be glad and rejoice, and give honor to him, for the marriage of the Lamb is come, and his wife hath made herself ready." And he is told to write, "Blessed are they which are called unto the marriage supper of the Lamb." Do you see it? Cana was the first sign. The cross was the sacrifice. Revelation is the fulfillment. A single line that crosses more than 2,000 years. And it all began in a dusty village in Galilee with 6 empty jars, a faithful mother, and a son who said 4 words misunderstood for centuries. Forget for a moment all the confused images you have received about Mary. Forget the extremes. Return to the text. Mary was not rejected by her son at Cana. Mary was elevated by her son at Cana. When Jesus said gynai to her, he was not humiliating her. He was acknowledging her as that prophetic woman whose obedience activates the first sign of the Messiah. Think about that. Without the faith of Mary, there would be no first miracle. Without the silent confidence of Mary, the jars would have remained empty. Without the 5 words of Mary to the servants would not have obeyed Jesus. And then John, in verse 11, says something we cannot pass over. This beginning of miracles did Jesus in Cana of Galilee, and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed on him. The faith of the disciples, the first public faith in Jesus as Messiah, was born at Cana. And it was born because a mother, without understanding everything, trusted. That is Mary, the mother by whose silent obedience heaven begins to pour itself out upon earth. Mary was not ignored by her son at the cross. Mary was given as mother to the beloved disciple, as a figure of the church that receives the faithful mother of its Lord. Mary was not left behind when the Spirit came. Mary was there in the upper room praying with the apostles, watching the church being born that her son had purchased with blood. And in every word she spoke, according to the few records we have, Mary taught us one single thing, one single lesson, one single direction. Her last sentence recorded in the New Testament at Cana is still the word she repeats to us today from the cloud of witnesses. Whatsoever he saith unto you, do it. Stop on that sentence. It is testamentary. It is the last thing the Bible preserves of the voice of Mary, and it is not a complex doctrine. It is not a theological treatise. It is not a spiritual recipe with 12 steps. They are 5 words directed to some frightened servants who did not know what to do with empty jars. And those 5 words still hold true today, 2,000 years later, for us. Do whatever he says, not what you want, not what your emotion dictates, not what culture applauds, not what your wounded heart pushes you to do, what he says. If everything you have learned in this video could be reduced to a single line to live by, that would be it. Return now, one last time, to the sentence that opened this video. Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. It no longer sounds the same, does it? It no longer sounds like a thoughtless son. It no longer sounds like coldness. It no longer sounds like rejection. It sounds like an announcement. It sounds like the Messiah who acknowledges before his mother that his mission is no longer just to fulfill human expectations, but to open the way of the kingdom. It sounds like the first chime of a clock that is going to ring 3 years later on Golgotha with the voice that will say, "It is finished." And you, who have made it this far, can no longer read John 2:4, the same as before, no more. If this study marked you, if it opened the text for you, if it made you see what you had been reading for years without seeing, do me one simple favor. Hit like twice. Once for Mary, the faithful mother. Once for the Son, the true bridegroom. Subscribe to the channel if you have not yet done so. Hit hype on the video, turn on the bell, and leave me in the comments one single word. The word that defines your own hour at this moment. Your own waiting, your own not yet. Because the next time you feel that God is telling you not yet, I want you to remember Cana. I want you to remember the jars filled to the brim. I want you to remember the face of a mother who learned to release her son and who now intercedes as few models in all of Scripture. I want you to remember that the God you serve is not a God who forgets your need. He is a God who knows the exact moment when your cup, now empty, must be filled with the best wine, not with the first. With the best, not with the fastest. With the deepest, not with the one you expected. With the one that is going to leave the governor of the feast of your life speechless. And I want you to remember that at the end of your own story, when you also reach your own hour, someone is going to taste the cup of your life. And he is going to say, astonished, the same thing the governor of the feast of Cana said 2,000 years ago, "Thou hast kept the good wine until now."